Hello and welcome to another podcast edition of Taiwan Talk, ICRT's weekly interview series, bringing you conversations from and about Taiwan. I'm Keith Manconi. Ride-hailing app Uber broke onto the Taiwan scene in 2013, offering passengers an alternative to the yellow cab industry and offering just about anyone with a car the chance to become a driver and make a buck. But like in many other countries around the world, the arrival of Uber has met with controversy here in Taiwan and extreme opposition from the government. Taiwan's regulators maintain that the company is operating illegally as a transportation service when its license only allows it to operate as an information service provider. And while the government has stopped short of shutting Uber down completely, it has slapped the company and its drivers with millions of NT in fines. Upping the stakes even further, just this past week, a legislative committee moved forward with an amendment that, if passed, would increase the maximum fines to 25 million NT for a single breach. So, we're kind of left in this weird limbo state. I mean, despite the fines, the government more or less is tolerating Uber's presence. Uber, for their part, they're sucking up the fines and continuing to operate. And riders and drivers are continuing to download the app and, by all accounts, enjoy the service quite a bit. Weird situation. To get some perspective on the path going forward and where Uber's place is in Taiwan, I recently made a trip over to Uber Taiwan's headquarters in Taipei to speak with their general manager, Lee Kai-gu. Here's that conversation. Lee Kai-gu, thanks for speaking with me.
Hey, Keith. Good to be here.
All right, so I think for some of those big questions, we can kind of just put a pin in that for a second, hold off, and instead look at the big news of the last week or so. Obviously, a little bit of a setback. The increase in fines hasn't passed 100% yet, but it's clearly moving forward. Let's just start with your reaction to that, seeing that in the past week or so.
Yeah, I'd say, Keith, I think generally we are pretty disappointed in the fact that it has passed the first reading. I think Taiwan has continually, prided itself in being an innovative country and continuously strive to become, what's so-called the Asia Silicon Valley. And I think, in this move to actually really limit a service like Uber to its citizens, as well as the would-be drivers in Taiwan, I think it's a step backward. And we hope that the legislators and the general people will continue to make more rational decisions around how to actually regulate services, ride-sharing services like Uber, and make Taiwan continue to be an environment that's actually very welcoming to new technology and innovation.
All right, well, let's kind of think about some of those deeper questions now and talk about getting away from the regulatory tussle, getting away from even thinking of this in terms of a legal dispute. Let's just think of this in terms of what is Uber bringing to Taiwan? How does it actually affect the lives of the people here and the way that people's jobs work? So obviously there's the ride-sharing service. There's also this year you came out with Uber Eats, which helps connect restaurants with folks that are hungry and can deliver food to customers. So why does Taiwan need that? What was there missing in the Taiwan industry that you're feeling?
Yeah, I think as a Taiwanese, back 3 years ago when Uber decided to enter the Taiwan market, and I hadn't been working at Uber yet, just as a Taiwanese citizen, I was super excited about the fact that a company like Uber, which at the time was still not as big, decided to make Taiwan as one of its early priority markets. At the time, I think Uber had only one other country in Asia, which was Singapore. And typically, I think we see bigger U.S. technology companies take a little bit of time before they actually decide to enter the Taiwanese market. So I think, to me, it was a win for Taiwan as a whole because I think it meant that U.S. technology or global technology companies were valuing Taiwan as a market. Two, they felt like it was an environment that was good to operate in. It was an environment that people would embrace technology. And three, the citizens of Taiwan would be able to enjoy, the newest and best services, which was not always possible, right? We've seen, cases where, in the past, for instance, the new iPhone releases would come to Taiwan at a third or fourth priority. And I think the Taiwanese people actually want to get into the edge and the forefront of overall technology. So to me, it was really exciting when Uber decided to launch in Taiwan.
But kind of getting back to how does this change, how people find rides or how people find work? I mean, I'm somebody who rides a cab to work every day because my shift starts at 5 a.m. and there's no buses. So every day I'm taking a cab. I have never once really had any issue finding a cab. Taipei is kind of famous for how many cabs it has and the glut of cabs that it has. So, you never wait for more than 5 minutes or so to find a cab. Generally, they're pretty friendly. Generally, you get where you need to go without too much hassle. So the question could be asked, why do we need this disruptive new innovation to come to the local transportation industry?
Yeah, I think for the first part, you look at it from two sides, right? One is from the rider side and the other one's from the driver side. So I think to your point on the rider side, I think Taipei is a city that actually typically has been quite friendly in terms of transportation options. There's a glut of different options, whether it be taxis, whether it be MRT, whether it be buses, or you can even walk to a lot of places. And I think what Uber strives to be is actually just an additional choice for consumers, right? We want to have consumers have the power to be able to choose. In certain cases, they would like to use Uber. In certain other cases, they like to use public transportation. And having that choice is something very powerful. And I think one thing that a lot of us living in Taipei often forget is that Taipei, although has really strong transportation network, there's a lot of cities in Taiwan who actually don't. When we launched, for instance, in Taichung and Kaohsiung, two cities, Taichung does not have a MRT system, Kaohsiung does. But when we launched in those two cities, we saw growth in those cities actually be much, much faster than Taipei at the same juncture of their growth. And I think the reason is because there are other places in Taiwan that actually require more transportation options. So in cities where people are forced to either ride their own scooters or drive their own cars, all of a sudden having the option of not having to do that, not having to go buy a car or rent a car or buy a scooter, becomes very powerful for people in the way they move about their cities. So I think that is actually quite a difference in terms of the rider choice component. And I think on the other side, it's really about kind of the options for the drivers, right? So to a similar extent that riders need more options, I think drivers need more options. So when people in an economy where people are striving to continually increase their income, so looking for additional income opportunities, feeling like the overall economic growth is not strong enough, people who want to actually drive in their spare time actually want more options. So having that additional options, one thing is that a lot of our Uber drivers on the current platform actually drive under 10 hours a week. So they're really driving in their additional spare time. So having that option to be able to utilize an asset that they purchased before, a vehicle, turn it from something that actually caused them more bills and more payments and turn it into something that actually gives them additional income is very powerful for economic growth as well.
Now, I guess the next question, though, would be, I think a lot of the people that I know see the value of Uber. A lot of people talk about how they love the fact that you can rate a driver, and so you can know a little bit more about the driver that you're going to drive with. So clearly there's aspects of the service that people are really enjoying and really picking up on. But the question then becomes, why does it need to be Uber? Why couldn't local industry pick up the slack? In fact, I think that's kind of the strategy that regulators seem to be taking right now. They've called for what they're calling a diversified taxi program next year that would create room for new companies that are based exclusively on a calling or apping sort of model rather than getting flagged down on the street. And they're trying to make a space for this sort of similar to Uber kind of services to sprout up among the local taxi industry. And so, if Uber can't, if the government can't find a way to make Uber fit into its regulatory framework, is it really so unreasonable for it to look for, a local industry to take that place instead, and it would still get all the benefits that you're talking about right there?
Yeah, I think overall having multiple entrants in a market, we've seen, and across the globe, there are many, many industries and markets that there are multiple players, including ourselves in the market. I think generally we've seen that actually benefits overall competition. So, that's certainly something that we're not against. I think overall the way Uber kind of sees the way this industry should be regulated is that we have three major principles that we feel like really should be protected. The first one is consumer choice, which is what we just talked about. Consumers should be able to have a wide range of choices in terms of the transportation services, whether it be price, level of service, type of vehicle, et cetera, et cetera. So consumer choice is something that is very near and dear to our heart. The second one is the overall safety for both the passenger and the the passenger and the driver. So we want to make sure that through the use of different screening processes as well as technology, we're able to ensure the safety and actually protect the safety of both the rider and the driver. And I think the third one is actually something that often people overlook, which is actually the driver's rights, right? So as someone who actually wants to drive and spend their extra time driving for a living or spend their time driving to earn additional income, we really like to have regulations that protect their interests. And I think as long as you're able to abide by those three kind of principles, then I think it doesn't matter if it's a local player or a foreign player coming into the market. I think that can benefit both the riders and drivers alike.
Okay, so let's back up and now discuss a little bit more the impasse that you have found yourself in with Taiwan's government. If we kind of look for a little bit more context, of course, Uber has had to deal with governments around the world as it's broken into this country or that country. And in Asia, there are a couple of examples where Uber has made a little bit more headway figuring out a way to work with the government and find regulations that work. Two examples that I've seen flagged would be Singapore and the Philippines. So let's just start by getting your perspective on why it's been more difficult in the Taiwan case.
I would say I think one is the fact that there have been other entrants in the other markets. So I think the government is more able to clearly kind of see the overall development as an industry. But I think one thing that we've learned actually just being in Taiwan for 3 years is that actually there's a lot of Taiwanese startups that are in similar types of spaces, not necessarily the exact same business model as Uber, but for instance, there are companies that are doing scooter ride sharing as well. There are companies using scooters doing sharing of courier services. So I think there are actually a lot of other players within the industry that are actually trying to make the sharing economy continue to be a thing in Taiwan. And I think that's in itself is something that's the government should be thinking more clearly about. And I think to your point about governments like Singapore, the Philippines, Australia, parts of India, generally speaking, if you look at ride sharing is something that did not exist in the world 5 years ago, right? And as you look at a global map, as we often like to look at, you'll slowly see different places around the world start to adopt ride-sharing regulations. You'll start to see different places of the world start slowly figuring out ways to actually regulate this industry in a way that's beneficial to both the government, to the incumbents, as well as the riders and the drivers and the consumers. So I think that Taiwan in general has continued to strive to become this place that's actually technology friendly, and we're hoping that during this process we're able to see in actual implementation the details are vary country to country. So it's not like every different countries have an exact model in terms of how to regulate it. But as long as you can go back to those three principles, protecting consumer choice, protecting safety, and protecting the rights of drivers, we're very, very willing to actually work with the Taiwanese government to find a very sensible solution.
And they've said that they're hoping to work with you as well. You kind of get a little bit of mixed comments, actually, from the Ministry of Transportation and Commerce. Sometimes they take a little bit harder of a line, saying, Uber's place in the economy could only be this, this, and this. Other times saying, no, we're happy for them to provide taxi services. We just need to make sure that they're doing it under the current regulations. So a little bit of a mixed bag there. But let's actually look at the sorts of regulations that you would need to figure out in order to work within Taiwan's framework. And I'm going to have to apologize to our listeners in advance. This might be getting a little bit into the weeds, but I think that it's important to look at the specifics here. So among the issues that you have to deal with that are outstanding issues would be the licensing issue. Obviously, taxi drivers, they need to pass very difficult tests. A lot of my taxi drivers complain about it all the time, that they have to pass these tests to get their licenses. That's really important. There's the insurance issue, which it sounds like you've made a little bit of progress on, making sure that you have public transportation service. There's also taxes. A lot of the revenue that Uber makes in Taiwan is actually taxed in other countries, and the government is actually seeking back taxes. And the flexibility of pricing. Obviously, there's a pretty rigid price structure that yellow cabs are subject to, and Uber, your business model doesn't fit very neatly into that. Among those issues, which would you say you're able to make progress on, and which would you say you think that Taiwan needs to find more flexibility on?
I would say that I'm pretty optimistic that we can make progress on all of them, as long as the two sides kind of come to the table with the same kind of aligned interest. And from our side, we believe that those three kind of principles that I just talked about are really, really important to the overall development of the industry. So I think taking one example that you just highlighted in terms of licensing. Like you said, a lot of taxi drivers might complain of the fact that their licensing process is overly rigorous. And some might argue that licensing process, that rigorous process, doesn't necessarily do what it's intended to do, which is provide safety or provide high quality, right? So how do you actually figure out a way to, and I think the other thing is thinking about this regulating or the licensing process of someone who actually drives 40 to 70 hours a week versus someone who drives 10 hours a week. Should those regulations be the same? Should that licensing process be the same? I think that is something that we've had a lot of conversations with a lot of different governments around the world, and what we found is if the whole idea of ride sharing is that people are able to take their vehicle and use the additional time that they're not using this vehicle to give people a ride and earn additional income. So making sure that these people actually don't need to go through unnecessary friction and bear on unnecessary costs is actually very, very paramount to the success of the overall industry. And that's the spirit of the industry, is just people being able to quickly and easily share their vehicle. And of course, we want to do that in a safe manner, right? So, for instance, in Uber in Taiwan right now, we make sure that any driver that comes onto our platform needs to go through a criminal background check to make sure that he doesn't have any prior criminal records. So I think going back to those three principles, as long as you're able to go into that safety, consumer choice, and driver rights component, I think the way the industry, or the way the overall ride-sharing industry is regulated in Taiwan, I think that's the key question that we need to address.
But just to be clear here, I mean, we wouldn't be talking about Uber fitting into the existing framework. You really are talking about, you think that the government needs to make some movement as well.
I would say the decision that the Taiwanese government needs to make at this point is, should you be looking at a new industry like ride sharing or the overall sharing economy? We have Airbnb, we have other companies doing similar kind of sharing economy spaces. Should you be looking at these industries in traditional regulatory frameworks that were written 30, 40 years ago? Or should we be looking at potentially new regulations or adjusting current regulations to better fit the current economic model, right? I think everybody kind of understands that, the business is always going to kind of go ahead of the overall regulatory development. And I think at this point, Taiwan is a little bit at a crossroads in terms of determining how to actually look at this industry. So do I actually want to look into potentially developing new regulations to regulate new economies and new businesses? Or do I want to say these new economies, these new businesses have no place in our current system because they don't fit into existing regulations that were written 30, 40 years ago? I think that's the big question that the Taiwanese government needs to decide.
What about taxes? Obviously, the government feels that you're currently not paying the taxes that you owe to the government. How do you get past that one?
Yeah, I would say, I think, in general, it's a little bit of a sequential issue. So you need to have the proper regulations to have the proper, whether it be tax or insurance kind of systems in place. And I think Taiwan is actually making pretty good progress in terms of this front, because there is a bill underway that is called, some around the world call it the Netflix tax, which is an ability to tax cross-border e-commerce companies in Taiwan. And so for a company that is providing services to people in Taiwan, that is actually not registered in Taiwan or is actually has their main business overseas, they're able to quickly and easily register as a taxpaying entity here in Taiwan. And we're very much looking forward to, and we actually have been in a lot of discussions with the Ministry of Finance about this particular bill, and we're very eager for this bill to pass, and then Uber is able to take the right steps to comply. So I think that is very much a work in progress, and we're very eager again to get a resolution on that. But I think the key question is still around how do you regulate the industry as a whole.
So in general, though, you feel like Uber could pay more of its revenue in Taiwan could be subject to taxes?
I think it comes down to the right kind of tax laws. In order for a company to pay the appropriate taxes, there needs to be a tax law behind it. And I think, this cross-border e-commerce tax is a great example of that new development in tax industry actually being able to help the foreign companies that are doing business overseas comply to Taiwanese tax laws. So I think, not just Uber, I think plenty of other cross-border technology companies will be welcome to the fact of being able to comply to these new regulations.
All right, so the way that we're kind of hearing about it here is it does sound like you're fairly optimistic about working with the government. You feel like these are difficult conversations, but conversations that you can make progress on. But at the same time, it does seem to be the case that the government is taking out a hard line here. And some folks have really said that part of the reason that the government has reacted the way that it has is because of the way that Uber approached Taiwan in the first place. Coming onto the scene in 2013, claiming that it's one kind of company that the government says, no, you're actually a transportation company. A lot of people feel like they weren't consulted. A lot of people feel like they weren't respected and the local regulations weren't respected. And so it does seem like off to a bad start at the very least. What do you say to that sort of criticism? Do you think there's any truth to that?
I mean, I think, Keith, overall, the company is still a very young company. People forget that we've been, in existence for, just a little bit over 6 years. So, I think as the company has continued to expand globally in other markets, I think that's something that is absolutely a learning curve that, we've had to scale, which is better learning how to communicate with, whether it be governments of different cultures, of different countries, better understanding the local regulations and actually how to best way to actually deal with these ambiguities, so to speak. So I think, absolutely, I think, when we first came into Taiwan, I think it was a little bit of a learning curve for the company. As I mentioned before, it was only our second market in Asia, right? And Singapore is perhaps a little bit more international in that sense. So it was absolutely, I think, as these past 3 years have gone by, I think we have learned a lot. I think we are very, very much committed to communication with various government officials. We've been in countless meetings. We've had plenty of regional people come through to show the fact that we value Taiwan as a market, to show that Uber as a company feels like Taiwan is an important market that we really want to continue to invest our resources in. So whether it be because this issue is a very complex issue that deals with many different government entities, whether it be the Ministry of Finance, the Department of Transportation, the National Development Council, the Ministry of Economic Opportunity. There's just so many different organizations and departments that we really need to talk to, and of course, each of them have their own ideas around how best to deal with this issue, right? So figuring out how to balance those different priorities and different pieces of advice, and figuring out the best way to move forward as a company is something that we very much are still learning on. But I think we have made a lot of progress in the past couple of years, and we continue to be very optimistic and very open to figuring out a kind of a swift resolution to this issue.
So do you have like the people from the Ministry of Transportation on speed dial right now? Have you like built up kind of a rapport with these folks? What's the tenor of that relationship?
Yeah, we've met members of the Ministry of Transportation many times, and through two different governments. So there have been a little bit turnover, especially at some of the higher levels. And I think we have gotten different pieces of advice. And I think ultimately, what we would like to find is an ability to actually help coordinate because it's really not just one department. It's the ability to actually coordinate the efforts of all these departments and actually get down into the room and actually really just sit down and hash these issues out and talk about the best way forward. Do they agree that they want to protect the interests of consumers in terms of choice and safety? Do they agree that they would like to, think about ways to reform current regulations to better protect the interests of drivers? Because right now the drivers actually are a group of people that really often get ignored, right? Whether it be taxi drivers or whether it be other drivers in other industries, generally their interests are not really put into the spotlight. People don't really think about protecting their rights and interests. Can we get into that dialogue where we align on those key principles and move and find a way forward? And we're more than happy. We've actually shared multiple times to multiple departments about ways that we've been able to find a very win-win solution in other markets. And we're looking forward to actually getting to that point in Taiwan.
Well, that's an interesting thing that you just said there, that the rights of drivers are something that need to be protected. I wonder, though, if many of the drivers in Taiwan would see Uber as the company to do that. Obviously, the yellow cab drivers have taken many opportunities to protest Uber. You yourself, personally, are the object of their attention. The Taipei City Professional Drivers Union filed charges against you for what I'm reading here, violations of the Company Act. So it seems like a bit of an antagonistic relationship there. The cab drivers that I've spoken with all seem to feel like, it's basically an unfair playing field that they're being forced to face, given the fact that Uber has a relatively small tax burden, and currently the insurance is dealt with in a different way. So they feel like it's an unfair playing field. So I'm not sure that they would see Uber as the company to protect their rights.
I would say that I think, as this industry has grown and as we've seen in other markets, as, ride sharing gets regulated, drivers end up, current incumbent drivers end up realizing that they actually have more options once this industry becomes regulated, right? Whereas previously maybe they, were choosing between driving a taxi or driving a bus or driving a truck. They now have an additional option of driving their own vehicle and joining a platform like Uber or some other platform around the world. So in that world where the actual platforms or the actual companies are competing for the time and vehicles of the drivers, that becomes a competitive situation for the drivers, right? And in that situation, the drivers are able to weigh the costs and benefits of joining each different type of profession or type of platform and ultimately decide which one better fits them, right? So, some drivers might feel like, okay, I would like to be a taxi driver because I want to be able to pick people up off the streets. I'm okay with changing my car to a yellow color and installing a meter. But some other people might say, hey, I'm using this car normally for my day job, and I would like to drive a couple hours on the weekend to better support my family. And in this case, maybe Uber is a better choice. So I think, ultimately having regulations will benefit the overall driver group because they're able to have more choice in terms of which platform, which industry they ultimately put their time into.
Now, just in general, for a lot of my friends would dismiss a lot of these regulatory concerns as, that's just the taxi industry being protectionist. There's no sense in any of this. They're really just trying to protect their bottom line. But the other way to look at it, I mean, these regulations accrue over time. You say many of them are very old, but they're there for a reason in a lot of cases. Insurance that gets to safety, licensing that gets to competence, taxation that gets to, supporting the government and all that. And with a brash and at least an aggressive strategy, I think it's fair to call it an aggressive strategy to jump onto the scenes even when regulators are telling you that doing so is illegal. I think that you could understand why many observers might have some concerns about a company from another country coming in and really pushing all of these issues, reasonably hard. So, for folks out there that are trying to make up their minds of, is Uber the good guy, and are they really, coming at this with the best of intentions, or are they really just going to try to squeeze these regulations to their logical conclusion to make a buck and hurt Taiwan's industry and take out some of these protections that we value in the process? For those sorts of observers that are trying to make up their mind, what do you say to them?
I think the first thing is I would say, speak to the drivers who use the platform, speak to the riders who use the platform a lot. I think To me, at least personally, it's pretty clear in terms of the positive impact that the platform like Uber is bringing about Taiwan, whether it be from economic opportunity, whether it be from additional choice, whether it be from improving the overall safety, or whether it be making Taiwan into a more innovative and technology-friendly country in general. I think those benefits to me are quite obvious. But I think obviously if you speak to the different riders and drivers who use the platform, I think they'll be able to tell you a similar type of story. And I think to your point about the regulations and the laws being in place for a reason, I think we absolutely agree with that, and I think we agree with the principles in which they were put in place. But I think the issue is that the world has changed in the past 30, 40 years in that ways that you might feel like will help protect consumer safety may not be necessary anymore because of the advent of technology. For instance, on Uber's overall platform, all of the information is tracked via GPS. All the driver information is online. All the route information is online, so that no trip is anonymous. So, in the case that there is any sort of incident that needs to be resolved, Uber in many, many markets around the world, and actually in Taiwan as well, is able to work directly with, the necessary departments, whether that be law enforcement, insurance agencies, et cetera. We're able to work directly with them to provide them with the right information that they need to actually get to a swift resolution, right? Whether it be the identity of the people involved, whether it be the actual location time of the actual trip. All that information was not actually there or tracked 10, 20 years ago because a lot of those trips were happening anonymously. So I think, with the advent of technology, and this is why the overall sharing economy has boomed in the past couple of years, is because, 10, 20 years ago, you would never have imagined to be staying at a stranger's house, right? Because that idea to you just felt unsafe. But now with the advent of technology, you see the fact that you're able to see ratings, previous testimonials from other people who've stayed with them. You're able to see pictures. You're able to communicate them via phone. And that's why a company like Airbnb would continue to thrive around the world, because there is that technology that is able to layer that level of trust to make two people that are interacting with each other trust each other more. And I think with this technology calls for potential new regulations as well, because with this technology, with this web of information, we need to go back and look at these regulations 10, 20 years ago that were written 10, 20 years ago to see, what things still make sense, what things are subject to some adjustments and changes. And I think that ultimately is kind of where Taiwan needs to decide what it wants to do, whether or not it wants to go back and look at these things and think about the original principles that were guiding them when they were written and whether or not they still stand. And ultimately, I think as long as our interests in that aspect are aligned, I think we'll be able to get to the right solution.
So, of course, Uber is a very future-looking company. It's something that it's a company that has a vision of improving services and improving work, through technology and through innovative ways of doing business. So maybe we can just talk a little bit about your thoughts on the future of Taiwan's economy, Taiwan's industry, Taiwan's transportation. And of course, a lot of the folks in the more techie side of things, startup-y side of things in Taiwan, they're big boosters of Uber. They make the argument that if Uber is really locked out, it would shut the door on other forms of potential technological innovation. So I'm curious for your thoughts. What role does Uber play, if it is running legally and competing along with other industries in Taiwan? What kind of role does Uber play in Taiwan's technology, idea, modern economy?
Yeah, I think, as we've been here for a couple of years, I've had, the pleasure of being able to interact with many different startups, both foreign technology companies who are looking to expand into Taiwan, both big and small, as well as local tech startups here. And I think, as for instance, this $25 million bill fine has come to light. Many of them have asked me saying, hey, is this thing for real? Is this thing actually going to pass? And they became, very worried, even though, they may not be directly impacted by this bill. And, as I've had those conversations with them, that one thing kind of became clear to me which was, they were seeing this as a point of reference for their industry, right? They were seeing this as a point of reference as to how Taiwan is able to deal with, these kind of situations where, the existing regulations don't necessarily apply to new technologies. And actually, are they looking into a way to proactively adjust the regulations or proactively deal with these regulations so that, we're able to better fit these new industries or shut them out, right? And I think, to them, they can potentially see a future in which if, this $25 million bill passes, they may see a future in which their industry or their development or their progress might be regulated out of existence as well. And they're very concerned and they're very worried because I think the reason why they decide to be in Taiwan is because they believe in the talent, they believe in the overall market potential of Taiwan as a whole. And as long as they feel like as long as the government is able to provide them with the proper regulatory framework and proper regulatory environments, they'll be able to shine and succeed and even take their talents globally or regionally. I think Taiwan feels very, very strongly about that. And I've seen the startup industry in Taiwan actually really flourish in the past couple of years. But if the government is not able to create the right type of environment for these startups to thrive and compete with each other, then I'm afraid that it's possible that these talent or these companies might decide to take their talents overseas and take their talents to other markets where they feel like it has potentially a more friendly environment. So I really think that we are at a crossroads right now in terms of the overall development of the industry.
Let's get a little bit even maybe more philosophical about where this is all going. I mean, obviously, in the U.S., we just had a big election that saw a lot of resentment about folks' abilities to move ahead in the economy, folks' abilities to get a job that has work that they feel is meaningful and they can prosper doing that work. And a lot of people point out that in the model of economy that we see in Silicon Valley, for example, there's some big winners. There's some folks that do great in that economy. And then there's a lot of folks where their jobs just kind of disappear or they become worth a lot less money. And so there's a lot of people that are just kind of left out of that economy. And that's kind of the narrative that we see in the U.S. And I think that for folks trying to assess companies like Uber, companies like Airbnb, where some folks are obviously at the middle of some great innovation, and they're going to be doing just fine, and obviously it helps consumers, but it also takes away good-paying jobs from a lot of folks. That's kind of the narrative that's come out. That's kind of the choice that a lot of people frame it as. Do you feel like that's an unfair choice, or what would you add to that?
I think we do need to be thoughtful, and I think, as you alluded to, I think in the previous election, surprising results for some. I think we do need to be thoughtful in the way that...
for some, did you have a crystal ball?
No, I had no. I was quite surprised myself. But, I would say that, I think we do need to be thoughtful in the way technology is impacting people's lives as it's actually developing around the world. I think that, generally we've seen technology be able to help people, in the past, 5-10 years. For instance, I think, taking one example, YouTube, before its existence, no one thought that you would be able to make a few videos yourself in the comfort of your own home and, make a couple $100,000 if you were this, viral sensational hit online, right? And so that created more, new economic opportunities for people as well. So having that platform, might be able to level the playing field to actually for a lot of people.
You're pitching the wrong guy on this. I work at a radio station. That's where our industry is going down the tubes.
Well, I think for innovative radio stations like ICRT, you're able to branch out to social media and online streaming ways to actually reach kind of new audiences, right?
I forgot my camera. Oops.
So I would say overall, I think technology should be helping people earn more economic opportunities, but there are going to be people potentially that are going to be very adversely affected by this advent of technology, and we need to be more thoughtful in figuring out ways to actually transition these people into new industries as well, so that their current livelihood, their current economic opportunity are not severely affected. And I think that's both the responsibility of the government as well as these industries that are pushing the envelope on these new technologies.
All right, I'm going to let you have the final word here. Just, 5 years, 10 years down the road, if things go the way that you want them to go and you're able to work with regulators the way that you want to work with, what does transportation in Taiwan look like, and what is Uber's role in that?
I think the overall vision for us is continue to make Taiwan into kind of a smart technology and smart transportation industry. And I think actually many government units within Taiwan are actually thinking about that. You hear the word smart city thrown around quite often. And I think so that, for sure is an aspiration for the overall Taiwanese government. And I think we have a pretty good role to play in that, right? Transportation is a very big part of the fabric that weaves together a city. And being able to track a lot of that data, being able to make the city more efficient, being able to design transportation nodes and roads in a way that actually is able to let people get around the city more efficiently. We have this service called Uber Pool in other places that's able to match people up who have similar routes in real time. That could potentially reduce the number of cars on the road. I think all those things could actually make Taipei and other cities in Taiwan into more livable and smarter cities. And I think ultimately that's what we want to do. We are a foreign company, but our team here is very much comprised of all Taiwanese people. And we all care deeply about the overall development of Taiwan. And I think we want to strive to make all the Taiwanese cities in Taiwan into smarter, more efficient, more convenient, and more affordable cities.
Actually, I lied. Final question, just because I want to get your thoughts on your talks with the government. Obviously, like we said before last week, disappointing news for Uber. What do you think is the path forward with regulators? Is there a tipping point where if they really do follow through with these fines that Uber is just going to have to close up shop and leave? Or is there still a path forward to talk things out?
Yeah, well, we're really hoping that the overall government, whether it be the governing units or the legislators themselves, will start to see and hear the voices of the people who feel like this is something that Taiwan needs and Taiwan wants. As I mentioned before, there are other sharing economy players in Taiwan. There's actually an association called the Sharing Economy Internet Association called SIA, and they've started a petition to actually figure out a way to regulate ride sharing. And so far, 50,000 people have signed that petition. So there are a lot of people out there who feel like this is something that they need, and they feel like they're calling for the government to create the right type of regulation to regulate it so that they can continue to use it. In this current status, we don't want to necessarily speculate on potential results going forward. But we really feel like we're really hoping that the government and the legislators are able to hear the people, the voices of the people and the drivers and riders, and say, hey, this is something that we want to stay in Taiwan. We want something for this service to continue to be used in Taiwan, and please help us in creating the proper regulations to regulate it and help this industry continue to flourish.
All right. Well, on that note, we're going to have to wrap things up. We have been speaking today to the general manager of Uber Taiwan, Lee Kai-gu. Lee Kai, thanks so much for speaking with us.
Thanks a lot, Keith.
Thanks for listening to another podcast edition of Taiwan Talk. Taiwan Talk, of course, broadcasts every Monday on ICRT FM 100 right here in Taiwan. You can find that at 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. Right after the top of the hour newscasts. You can, of course, also find the extended podcast versions of these interviews, which is the version you were just listening to right here, on the ICRT website, on iTunes, a couple of other places. That's where to find that. Before I go, just want to let our listeners know that if you really want to dig even deeper into the Uber controversy here in Taiwan, a great article to read would be Taiwan's Continuing Uber Controversy by a journalist by the name of Matthew Folko. Hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. If I'm not, I apologize. Anyway, that article can be found at the Newslens International Edition, linked to it in our blog. He really took the time to lay out all of the issues that we discussed today in even more detail and just dig very deeply into some of the regulatory issues that they're facing, some of the economic issues that Taiwan is facing, and kind of just synthesize that all in a way that I found very easy to digest. So thank you, Matthew Folko, for that, and I recommend it to any of our listeners interested in this issue. For us, though, that's going to be it for today. We're going to have to sign off here for Taiwan Talk and ICRT. I'm Keith Menconi. See you next time.